Long COVID is now a recognised illness, and millions of pounds of research all over the world is taking place into causes and possible treatments for it. It seems like long COVID is caused by a multitude of different syndromes because so many systems in the body of everyone who has it are being infected. What is most frightening is that many who caught COVID in the first wave, around March 2020, like I did, are not better. In fact, even now, some are still getting worse. Let's look briefly at some of the causes of long COVID that are being explored. And first, let's start with how the virus gains entrance to our bodies. The SARS-CoV-2 virus, as it is known, is able to invade and seed within the brain and spinal cord. After entering the nose, it can travel up to the cribriform plate, through which it can make its way to the olfactory bulb and the frontal lobe of the brain. From the mouth, it can be transported to the brainstem by a process termed neuroinvasion. In both cases, by the nose or the mouth, there is a direct passage to the lungs and to the heart. SARS-CoV-2 is known as a super antigen. That means that in response to it, our bodies launch an extreme immune response. However, despite this very strong immune response, our bodies may actually not be able to destroy the virus. And this leaves us with what is known as viral persistence. That is, the virus remains active within us after the initial earlier stages of the infection. Scientists have found small amounts of the virus lingering out of reach of the immune system. Active virus has been found in the eyes, brains, testes, spinal cords, guts and lungs of people who will at that same time test negative on a PCR. There's also evidence it can burrow into nerves and hide there. And in this case, the virus would be missed by a PCR test because a PCR test can only detect the virus if it's in the nose or the throat. The virus hides away in remote pockets of the body, known as viral reservoirs or anatomical sanctuaries or immune-privileged sites. An immune-privileged site is difficult for the immune system to enter because the body has decided that these sites are such important areas that it can't risk the damage that would be done by its own immune reaction. The risk of damage caused by an immune reaction in these areas outweighs the risk of infection, and the body takes that risk. So it protects these areas away from access by the immune system. Unfortunately, the virus has apparently learned where these places are, and it makes a beeline for them. Inactive fragments of viral DNA, rather than the whole virus, also remain in the bodies of people who have had COVID-19. And some scientists think these are partly responsible for the body acting in a distorted way, as it does in long COVID, because it's fighting them even though they are just inactive DNA protein. Because there is no test for the virus other than a PCR test, the persistence of viral infection is not possible to detect except through analysis of feces or by autopsy. If viral persistence is the main factor in maintaining long COVID, then the development of an antiviral medicine will eventually tackle the problem. An immune system in hyperdrive is also involved in long COVID. We're in a state of red alert. High levels of inflammation are present. You'll hear this word inflammation a lot because all viruses, including COVID-19, cause inflammation. And most of our symptoms are caused by inflammation, anywhere in the body and often in many places at once. Deaths from COVID-19 are usually caused by extreme inflammation. You will have heard of the cytokine storm. This is a state of extremely high activity of immune cells called cytokines, which can lead to acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, tissue damage, multi-organ failure, and death. And a leading theory to explain long COVID is that overactivity of cytokines remains during long COVID, but at a much lower level. A type of immune cell called a mast cell is being looked at very closely by researchers into long COVID at the moment because it's thought that they might be behind this hyperinflamed state in long COVID, but also in ME and chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. A London doctor called Dr. Tina Pearce has been having good results relieving some of the symptoms of long COVID patients. And she's been researching the connection between a syndrome known as mast cell activation syndrome, or MCAS, and long COVID. Early on, she noticed that the symptoms of people with long COVID that were consulting her were identical to those of mast cell activation syndrome. Mast cell activation syndrome, MCAS, is similar to histamine intolerance, and it's of great interest to anyone with chronic, long-term, and often poorly understood illnesses because it's thought to be the undiagnosed cause of many of them. According to Dr. Tina Pearce, people diagnosed with MCAS have previously been labelled as having ME, fibromyalgia, acid reflux, IBS, positional orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, otherwise known as POTS, food intolerances, urticaria, that's hives, vestibular migraine, eczema, asthma, rosacea, chronic migraine, facial pain, dysautonomia, severe anxiety, panic attacks, insomnia, rashes, poor reactions to anaesthetics, intolerance to various drugs, interstitial cystitis, and many others. These people usually have completely normal tests and investigations like us, and they therefore remain mainly untreated, often being labelled as having unexplained symptoms. Yet it is now being recognised that these symptoms are mostly caused by a hyperactive immune system causing inflammation. MCAS can be triggered or made worse by a severe infection. In our case, that would be COVID-19. But it could be triggered by the Epstein-Barr virus or food poisoning or chickenpox or Lyme disease and maybe even an insect bite. It's also thought that many long haulers may have been suffering from MCAS before they developed long COVID, and that is why we developed long COVID. One of the reasons that the link between long COVID and MCAS is of great interest to us as long haulers is that there is already a treatment for MCAS that is cheap and simple. This treatment mainly consists of a low histamine diet. On top of that, it's recommended to take a type 1 and a type 2 antihistamine, as well as minerals and vitamins to support the calming down of mast cells, and to also take an enzyme known as DAO, which breaks histamine down in the body. COVID-19 infects and damages the inner lining of the blood vessels, known as the epithelium. At first, medics were puzzled as to why what was known as a respiratory virus could infect almost every organ system at once. Soon they discovered that the reason was that the virus was affecting the blood vessels supplying all of these organs. And this was leading to less blood flow, less oxygen to them, and the development of widespread inflammation throughout the body. In April 2020, a paper published in The Lancet gave the first evidence that the coronavirus that causes COVID-19 can infect endothelial cells. That's the inside of our blood vessels. Combined with the virus's effect on the immune system, where overactivation of our inflammation systems can also make the blood more likely to clot, this helps explain the huge range of debilitating symptoms. This also helps explain why people with certain heart conditions and circulatory problems seem to be at higher risk of developing severe complications of COVID-19. If another condition such as diabetes or high blood pressure has already damaged the blood vessel lining, then the virus's impact will be magnified. The COVID-19 spike protein and many different immune cells have been found trapped inside insoluble little blood clots in the bloodstream of long haulers. These clots can clump together, causing bigger clots that can get lodged in areas such as the lungs or brain, causing fatigue or breathlessness. Long haulers have also been found to have hyperactivated platelets, which is a different clotting system in the body. In May 2020, a study of the lungs of people who died of the virus showed the formation of tiny blood clots within the smallest vessels in the lungs. There were 9 times as many of these clots in people with COVID-19 as in the lungs of people who died from flu. As well as increasing the risk of stroke, heart attack, and deep vein thrombosis, clotting reduces oxygen in the blood and it stops it flowing around our bodies properly.